Once upon a time, in a small village nestled at the edge of an ancient forest, there stood a tree so enormous and mighty that its branches seemed to touch the sky. It was known as the heart of the oak. This tree, older than anyone could remember, had stood guard over the village for generations, its roots deeply entwined with the earth beneath it. The villagers believed that the oak held the wisdom of the earth itself, that its age and grandeur contained secrets passed down through time. Every spring, its leaves would shimmer with life, and its fruit would nourish the land, ensuring the villagers' crops grew strong. As the sun set behind the towering oak, casting long shadows across the village, the air was always filled with a sense of peace and belonging. The oak was a symbol of strength and security, a living testament to the bond between the earth and the people who lived on it. Yet, as the seasons passed, even the mightiest tree could not escape the trials of time. The village had always prospered, but now something ominous was beginning to stir. The land had started to show signs of strain, the grass less green, the rivers slower. And when the clouds began to disappear from the sky, replaced by a scorching sun, the villagers realized the truth. A terrible drought had arrived. It was more than just a dry season. It was a sign that something ancient was amiss. The drought took hold of the village with unforgiving force. Days turned into weeks, then months, and still the rains never came. The crops shriveled in the fields, the once bustling riverbanks became barren, and the earth itself cracked under the heat. The villagers, once so full of hope and life, now looked around in despair. Their homes, their livelihoods, and their very survival were threatened. Yet, the heart of the oak, which had always been a steadfast guardian, began to show signs of weakness. Its once vibrant leaves drooped and turned brown, and its bark, which had been smooth and strong for centuries, now began to wither. The villagers gathered beneath its great canopy, hoping for solace, but there was no comfort to be found. The oak, just like them, seemed to be dying, and no one knew how to stop it. Among the villagers was a young girl named Elara. She had grown up playing in the shade of the oak, running her fingers over its rough bark and listening to the whispers of the wind through its branches. The oak had been her refuge, her silent protector. Now, as she stood beneath its fading branches, she felt a deep sorrow in her heart. The oak was more than just a tree to her. It was a part of her life, a part of the village itself. Without it, she feared they would all be lost. On the edge of tears, Elara whispered to the oak, a prayer of desperation and love, asking for its strength to return, for the land to heal. And then, something extraordinary happened. As Elara's words echoed in the quiet air, a soft rustling came from deep within the oak's ancient branches. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then she heard it, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. The voice was the oak's, old and wise, resonating deep within her heart. "Do not fear, young one." The oak spoke, its voice like the creaking of old wood, familiar and comforting. "I have watched over this land for centuries, but I cannot heal it alone. The land and I are bound, and only through sacrifice will the balance be restored." Elara's eyes widened in disbelief, her heart pounding in her chest. The oak was speaking to her, offering her a chance to save the village. In a low, almost sorrowful tone, the oak continued, "I will give you one gift, an acorn which holds my soul. Plant it by the riverbank, where the earth is thirsty, and the land will flourish again. But know this, the life that will grow from it will be the price of my own." The weight of the oak's words sank into Elara's soul. The oak was offering her its very essence, the heart of its being, to restore the land, but at the cost of its own life. She felt a deep ache in her chest, knowing that this sacrifice was necessary for survival, yet unwilling to lose the oak that had been her lifelong companion. Without hesitation, Elara knelt by the ancient tree, her hand reaching up to catch the acorn that fell gently from a branch, glowing faintly in the dying light of the day. She held it tightly, promising with all her heart that she would honor the oak's gift and make sure its sacrifice was not in vain. Elara stood there for a moment, the acorn warm in her palm, its faint glow casting an ethereal light on her face. The oak's voice faded into the stillness of the evening, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She knew what she had to do, yet the weight of the decision pressed heavily on her shoulders. The village's fate, the oak's legacy, and the future of the land now rested in her hands. With a deep breath, Elara turned and began to walk toward the riverbank, the path leading her past the dry fields and withered crops. Each step felt heavier than the last as she carried the acorn with great care. The once thriving river was reduced to a mere trickle, the water barely enough to sustain even the smallest plant. But Elara knew that here, by the river's edge, the oak's spirit could take root and begin to heal the land. When she reached the riverbank, she knelt down and gently pressed the acorn into the earth. The ground felt cold and lifeless beneath her fingers, but Elara whispered words of gratitude to the oak, urging the acorn to grow strong and true. As she stood back up, she felt a stirring in the air, as if the very earth beneath her feet was awakening to the oak's power. For a moment, nothing seemed to change. The air remained still, and the land was as barren as before. But Elara's heart swelled with a quiet hope, knowing that the oak had given its all for this one chance. She stayed for a while, watching the acorn buried in the earth, before finally standing and walking back to the village, her mind at peace. And then, in the quiet of the night, something miraculous began to unfold. The night passed slowly, the stars above the village twinkling like distant promises. Elara slept restlessly, her dreams filled with visions of the oak and its sacrifice. She could feel its presence, not just in the whispers of the wind but in the very rhythm of the earth beneath her. The village was quiet, but there was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. The following morning, Elara awoke early, her heart fluttering with a mixture of hope and fear. As she stepped outside, the sun had barely touched the horizon, casting the world in soft golden hues. She hurried to the riverbank, her feet light despite the weight of the previous day's events. When Elara reached the spot where she had planted the acorn, she could hardly believe her eyes. The ground, which had once been dry and cracked, was now soft and damp, as if the earth itself had been nourished. The acorn she had buried was no longer a tiny seed. It had sprouted, its delicate green shoots reaching toward the sky, glowing with a soft golden light. The air around it seemed to hum with life, and the leaves of the sapling shimmered in the morning light. Elara knelt beside the new tree, her breath caught in her throat. It was not the oak that had stood tall for centuries, but it was a new beginning, a second chance. The drought that had plagued the village seemed to lift in an instant, as if the land had taken a deep, rejuvenating breath. The river began to flow more freely, the grass turned green, and even the sky above seemed to brighten, shedding its oppressive heat. For the first time in months, Elara felt the warmth of hope fill her chest. The sacrifice of the oak had been honored, and the land was alive again. As the days passed, the land around the new sapling flourished. Crops that had once struggled to grow now burst forth in abundance, their leaves lush and green. The river's waters, once a mere trickle, swelled with fresh life, flowing strong and steady once more. The villagers marveled at the transformation, unable to comprehend the miracle that had occurred. It was as if the very soul of the earth had been restored, and they had Elara to thank for it. But while the village thrived, there was something else that weighed heavily on Elara's heart. The oak, the mighty tree that had stood for so long as their protector, was no longer there. Its absence was a quiet but ever-present reminder of the sacrifice it had made. The old oak's branches, which had once stretched wide across the village, now lay bare, its bark peeling and crumbling. It was a stark contrast to the new tree, which stood tall and proud, its leaves vibrant and full of promise. Elara spent much of her time near the sapling, tending to it with gentle hands. She watered it daily, whispered to it in the quiet of the mornings, and placed offerings of flowers and seeds around its base. It was the oak's gift to the village, But it was also a symbol of the bond between her and the earth, an unspoken promise that she would care for the land as it had cared for her. One evening, as Elara knelt beside the sapling, she felt a presence beside her. Looking up, she saw the villagers gathered in a circle around her. Their faces were full of gratitude and reverence, their eyes shining with awe. The once quiet village had come to life, and they had all felt the transformation. The oak had given them its gift, and Elara had been its messenger. The villagers, moved by the change in their world, came together to honor the oak's sacrifice. They built a small altar around the base of the new sapling, placing stones and carved wooden plaques, each one inscribed with words of thanks and remembrance. The air was thick with reverence as they shared stories of the old oak and how it had stood watch over the village for generations, offering protection and wisdom. The tree had not just been a symbol of strength but a constant companion in their lives, its roots entwined with their own. Elara stood quietly, her heart swelling with pride and sadness. She had never expected to become the village's symbol of hope, but now, standing before the oak's successor, she felt the weight of its legacy. The villagers had always depended on the oak, but now they depended on her, as if the cycle of the land's renewal had passed into her hands. Though the sapling had only just begun to grow, there was something about it that felt wise beyond its years. The leaves shimmered in the sunlight with the same vibrancy as the old trees had, and the roots, though still young, seemed to stretch deeply into the earth. Elara could feel the oak's presence, not gone, but transformed into something new and living, something that would continue to nurture the village for generations to come. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Elara found herself spending more and more time by the tree. She had become its keeper, its steward. With each passing day, the oak grew taller, its branches stretching toward the sky like the arms of an old friend. And with each new leaf that unfurled, Elara felt a deep connection to the land, as if the very essence of the oak had been passed into her, creating an unbreakable bond between her and the earth. The seasons continued their slow dance, and with each cycle, the new oak grew stronger. The sapling, once fragile and small, was now a towering presence by the riverbank, its branches wide and full of life. The villagers, too, felt the change deep within their bones. The land, which had once been brittle and dry, was now rich with the scent of flowers and the hum of bees. The crops grew taller and more abundant than ever before, and the village, once on the brink of despair, flourished as if it had been reborn. But Elara knew that the oak's sacrifice was not just a gift for the village. It was a reminder of the delicate balance between humanity and nature. The land had given so much, but in return it demanded respect, care, and understanding. She could not allow the village to forget the lessons the oak had taught them. She made it her life's work to ensure that the villagers respected the earth as they had respected the oak. One evening, as the golden light of dusk poured over the village, Elara sat beneath the oak's branches, her fingers tracing the smooth bark. She could hear the faint whisper of the wind, as if the oak itself were speaking to her. It was a quiet voice, but it was there, its message clear. The earth, like the oak, had its cycles of life and death, and in those cycles there was strength. But only through respect, patience, and love could the balance be maintained. The villagers, under Elara's guidance, began to change their ways. They planted more trees, respected the land's rhythms, and made offerings to the oak to ensure that its legacy lived on. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about harmony with the earth, a partnership that could last for generations to come. As the years passed, Elara felt a deep sense of fulfillment in her heart. The oak had been a gift, but its true gift was the lesson it had left behind. That life was not just about what you take, but what you give back. And in that, the village found its greatest strength. Years rolled on, and with them, the oak grew older and stronger, its roots now deeply intertwined with the land. The village, once fragile and desperate, had become a vibrant testament to the power of nature's resilience. Every year, the harvest was bountiful, the crops healthy, and the river steady. But it was not just the land that had flourished. It was the people too. They had learned to live in balance with the earth, no longer taking more than they needed but giving back as much as they could. Elara, now a young woman, had become the village's wise guardian, the oak's caretaker. She spent her days tending to the new tree, making sure its roots remained strong and its branches reached ever higher. But beyond the physical care, she had become a symbol of the bond between the village and nature, a living testament to the oak's sacrifice and the lessons it had imparted. One afternoon, as Elara sat beneath the shade of the oak, a young girl approached her. The child, no more than 5, looked up at the towering tree with awe in her eyes. "Is it true, Elara?" the girl asked shyly. "Did the oak really give its life for us?" Elara smiled softly, her heart warmed by the question. She nodded and placed a hand on the child's head. "Yes," she said gently. "The oak gave us its life, but in doing so, it gave us the chance to live in harmony with the land. It taught us that we are all connected, the earth, the trees, the animals, and us. We must always remember that." The child looked up at the tree, her gaze full of wonder and respect. "Will we take care of it forever?" she asked. Elara nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "Yes, we will. As long as we remember its gift, it will continue to watch over us." The child smiled, understanding. The legacy of the oak, passed down through generations, would live on, carried by the hands of those who honored it. The earth, the trees, and the people would forever remain intertwined. As the years passed, Elara's bond with the oak deepened, and the village continued to thrive. Every day, she felt the weight of her responsibility as the keeper of the oak's legacy. It wasn't just about ensuring the tree grew strong. It was about keeping alive the spirit of sacrifice, respect, and balance that had saved the village so many years ago. She became a living embodiment of the oak's wisdom, teaching the villagers not just how to care for the land, but how to listen to it. On the edge of the village, near the forest where the original oak had once stood, the new oak now cast a great shadow, its branches reaching far and wide. Elara often sat beneath its vast canopy, watching the land that had been healed by the oak's gift. The once barren fields now teemed with life, and the village was a place of peace and abundance. The oak had given the land the strength to endure, but it was the villagers' respect for it that ensured they would never forget the lesson. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the village, Elara stood before the oak. She had grown old, her once young hands now worn from years of care and love. But her heart remained as full as ever, content with the knowledge that she had fulfilled her promise to the oak. She had kept the land alive, and in doing so had kept the village alive too. A soft breeze rustled the leaves above her, and for a moment, Elara felt as though the oak was speaking to her again. "You have done well, my child," the voice whispered through the rustling leaves, just as it had when Elara was young. "The land is strong because of your love. You have learned the true meaning of sacrifice and care." Elara closed her eyes, a gentle smile on her lips. "I will always remember," she whispered back. And in that moment, she knew the oak's legacy would endure, not just in the tree itself, but in the hearts of all those who had come to understand the deep, sacred bond between humanity and nature. As the years grew longer, the oak became a symbol of the enduring cycle of life, of birth, growth, decay, and renewal. The village had become a place where the seasons were celebrated, where every harvest, every rain, and every new shoot of green was a reminder of the oak's sacrifice and the lessons it had imparted. Elara, though growing older, found joy in teaching the younger generations about the importance of respecting the earth. She spoke often of the old oak, its great branches, and the story of how it had given its life for the village. In turn, the villagers carried this wisdom forward, passing it from one generation to the next. One particularly warm summer day, as Elara sat beneath the oak's shadow, a group of children gathered around her. Their eyes sparkled with curiosity, eager to hear the story once more. Elara smiled, her hands resting gently on the soil, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her fingertips. "Do you know," she began, "that this oak was once small, just like you?" The children giggled and nodded, their faces full of wonder. "And do you know that it is here because of a great sacrifice?" The children listened intently, their faces serious for their age. "The oak gave everything it had to make sure we could survive. And now we must always take care of it, just as it took care of us." Elara paused, looking up at the tree with deep affection. "This tree is not just wood and leaves. It is the earth's memory. It holds the wisdom of everything that came before it." As she spoke, the children's eyes grew wide with understanding. They, too, would carry the oak's lesson forward. It was no longer just Elara's responsibility. It was the responsibility of every person in the village to protect the land and honor the oak's gift. The sun began to set, and Elara could feel the familiar stillness of the evening settling over the village. It was as if time itself had slowed, the air heavy with peace. The oak, its branches swaying gently in the breeze, seemed to sigh in contentment. The legacy of the oak, and the village's connection to the earth, would live on, forever nurtured by love, respect, and sacrifice. Elara's hair had turned silver with age, and her hands had become worn from years of tending to the oak. But her heart remained as full and as young as ever, filled with the same love and devotion she had felt when she first planted the acorn by the riverbank. She had spent her life caring for the new oak, just as the villagers had spent their lives caring for the earth. It had become second nature to her, as much a part of her existence as breathing. In the quiet moments of the evening, Elara often found herself reflecting on the oak's sacrifice. She had seen it firsthand, the way the land had flourished after the tree's passing, how its spirit lived on in the very earth it had nurtured. It was a reminder of the delicate balance that existed between nature and humanity, a balance that was fragile yet profound. The oak's legacy was not just the tree itself, but the wisdom it imparted to all who had been touched by it. One evening, as the village settled into the gentle quiet of dusk, a young man came to visit Elara. He had recently returned to the village after traveling far and wide, and he sought her guidance. The villagers had always respected Elara for her deep connection to the earth, and now the young man hoped to learn from her wisdom. "I've seen many lands, Elara," he said, his voice earnest. "But no place is as peaceful, as alive as this village. What is your secret?" Elara smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the deep wisdom of the oak. "The secret, my dear, is simple," she said, placing a hand over her heart. "We have learned to give, not just take. We have learned that life is about balance, about nurturing, not exploiting. The oak taught us that true strength comes not from what we take, but from what we give back." The young man nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He stayed for many days, learning from Elara, watching as she tended to the oak with the same love and care she had shown it since she was a child. And slowly he began to understand. The village was not a place of mere survival. It was a place of harmony, where the earth and its people coexisted in quiet reverence. As the years continued to pass, Elara's age became more apparent, but her connection to the oak remained as strong as ever. The tree had become a symbol of her life, its towering branches a mirror of the wisdom she had gained over the years. She spent her days walking among the roots, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, and thinking of the oak's sacrifice, how it had given its life for the village, for the land, for all of them. One autumn afternoon, as the leaves of the new oak began to change color, Elara stood at its base, gazing up at the canopy that stretched far above her. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, the setting sun casting long shadows across the land. It was a beautiful sight, one that filled Elara with a sense of peace. But there was something else, something she had always known deep within her heart. The oak, though strong and tall, was not invincible. Everything had its time, and the tree's life too would one day come to an end. Elara had always known this, but it wasn't something she had wanted to acknowledge. The thought of losing the oak, the living embodiment of her childhood, of her bond with the earth, was a painful one. Yet she knew that this was the way of the world. Life was cyclical, a continuous dance of birth, growth, decay, and renewal. The oak had taught her this lesson long ago. One evening, as Elara sat beneath the oak, a soft breeze rustled the leaves above her. It was as though the oak was speaking to her once more, its voice familiar and comforting. "You have done well, my child," the oak seemed to say. "You have honored my gift, and now it is time for me to rest." Tears welled up in Elara's eyes as she placed a hand on the tree's rough bark. "I will always remember you," she whispered, her voice full of love and sorrow. "And I will make sure that your legacy lives on." In that moment, Elara realized that the oak's true legacy wasn't just in the land it had nourished, or the village it had protected. It was in the hearts of those who had been touched by its spirit. And as long as the village thrived, as long as its people lived in harmony with the earth, the oak's sacrifice would never be forgotten. As the seasons turned, the oak continued to stand tall, but Elara knew the time was coming when its branches would no longer reach toward the sky. She spent more time with the tree than ever before, tending to its needs, speaking to it as if it were still the vibrant, living oak it once was. She would tell the tree stories, tales of the village, of the children who ran beneath its branches, of the harvests it had witnessed, and the sacrifices it had made. With each passing day, the oak seemed to grow quieter, its leaves no longer whispering in the wind as they once had. One winter morning, as Elara walked beneath the oak's bare limbs, the air crisp and still, she noticed something that stopped her in her tracks. The ground at the base of the tree, where she had first planted the acorn, was soft and rich, the earth feeling alive beneath her fingertips. She knelt down, her heart quickening with realization. Beneath the surface, hidden in the soil, she felt the stirring of new life. The acorn, though it had given birth to a mighty tree, still held within it the potential for new growth. It was as if the oak had left behind one final gift, a promise that even in death, it would continue to nourish the land, to continue the cycle of life. Elara felt a quiet peace settle over her, and for the first time in many years, she was able to smile. The oak's sacrifice had not been in vain. Its spirit lived on, not just in the new tree it had given life to, but in the earth itself, in the soil that would always carry its memory. The land was no longer just a place of survival. It was a place of rebirth, of endless possibility. With the first hint of spring on the horizon, Elara stood beside the oak, her heart full of gratitude. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks, knowing that the cycle of life would continue, and that the oak's legacy, its strength, its wisdom, and its love, would never truly end. The days grew longer, and with each passing moment, the village blossomed under the quiet, enduring presence of the oak. Elara, now much older, had become more of a legend than a living figure. Her name was spoken with reverence, her wisdom passed down through the generations, but she never sought fame or recognition. Her heart was at peace, knowing the village would continue to thrive as long as they honored the teachings of the oak. One particularly serene morning, as the sun's early rays cast a warm golden glow over the village, Elara sat beneath the oak, her hands resting in her lap. Her body was frail, and her once vibrant hair had turned silver, but her eyes still shone with the same gentle wisdom that had guided her from a young age. As the village began to stir, children running through the streets, animals waking from their slumber, Elara felt the quiet stirring of the earth beneath her. She felt the oak's presence, not just in the physical world, but in the rhythm of the land itself. She had always known that the oak's life would one day come to an end. But that knowledge didn't cause her fear. It brought her a sense of peace. The oak had given its life to the land, and now its spirit lived on in every leaf that bloomed, in every harvest, in every breath of wind. Elara smiled softly, looking up at the new oak, now tall and magnificent, its branches spreading wide as it towered over the village. The acorn had sprouted into something even greater than she could have imagined, and it stood as a constant reminder of the deep connection between humanity and the earth. The oak had not only given life to the village, it had reminded them of the power of selflessness, of sacrifice, and of respect. As she sat there, a peaceful warmth washed over her, and Elara knew that her time had come. The oak had shown her the way, and now, just as it had once given itself to the earth, she too would pass into the earth, becoming one with the land she had loved and cared for. As the days grew warmer, Elara's strength began to fade, and the villagers sensed that the time had come for her to join the oak in the earth she had so lovingly tended. The village, still thriving under the watchful branches of the mighty oak, continued to bustle with life. But now, there was a quiet sadness that settled over the people. They had known Elara for so long, and her wisdom had been a constant guiding light for them all. It was as if the oak itself was calling her home. One evening, as the sun set behind the towering oak, casting long golden shadows across the village, Elara gathered with the villagers beneath the great tree. She had lived a life of peace and purpose, and now she was ready to rest. The oak had whispered its farewell to her, as if it knew she had fulfilled her mission. The land was in balance, the village safe, and the cycle of life would continue as it always had. With the soft murmur of the village behind her, Elara knelt at the base of the tree, her hand resting on the familiar bark. The wind stirred around her, carrying the scent of the earth and the promise of renewal. She closed her eyes, feeling the energy of the oak, the land, and the village all around her. It was a moment of perfect harmony, a moment that felt timeless, as if the earth itself was embracing her. As Elara took her final breath, the oak seemed to shimmer in the fading light, its leaves rustling softly, as if whispering one last message. In that moment, Elara knew that her spirit, like the oak's, would live on in the earth. The love she had given, the care she had shown, would remain in the soil, in the roots, in every new leaf that sprouted. Her legacy would endure in the village that had flourished because of the oak's sacrifice, and in the hearts of those who remembered the lessons of balance, sacrifice, and respect. The village continued to thrive, but in the quiet of the nights, the villagers felt a deep loss. Elara's passing was mourned by all, for she had been more than a guide. She had been the heart of the village, just as the oak had been. Yet, even in their grief, they knew that the lessons she had imparted, the wisdom she had shared, would continue to live on. It was not just her memory that would endure. It was the harmony she had fostered between the village and the earth. The new oak, now standing tall and mighty, seemed to carry her spirit. Its branches reached out toward the sky, just as Elara's teachings had reached into the hearts of the villagers. It had become more than just a tree. It was a living monument to the deep bond between humanity and the natural world, a reminder of the sacrifice that had brought them all to this place of peace and prosperity. Each year, the villagers gathered beneath the oak, not only to celebrate the harvest and the change of seasons but to honor Elara's legacy. They would tell stories of her, of the lessons she had taught them, and of how she had cared for the land with such love and devotion. The oak became a symbol of remembrance, not just for Elara, but for the spirit of sacrifice and the deep connection between all living things. As the seasons passed, the oak grew even taller, its roots sinking deeper into the earth, anchoring it firmly to the land that had been healed by the sacrifices of both Elara and the great tree that had preceded her. And as the oak grew, so did the village, for they were bound together in an eternal cycle of life, death, and renewal. The village was no longer just a place of survival. It was a living testament to the power of respect, care, and balance. As time went on, the village became known far and wide as a place of harmony, a sanctuary where the earth and its people coexisted in peaceful balance. Travelers from distant lands would often stop to witness the extraordinary tree that had been the heart of the village for generations. They would sit under its shade, listening to the elders speak of Elara and the oak's sacrifice, of the wisdom that had been passed down from one generation to the next. The new oak had become a symbol of strength and resilience, standing tall in the center of the village like a silent guardian. Its roots, deep in the soil, connected it to the earth in ways no one could fully understand. It was not just a tree. It was a living legacy, carrying the teachings of the past while nourishing the future. The children, who had grown up in the village surrounded by the oak's presence, would often play beneath its branches. They would ask questions about Elara, and the elders would recount the stories of her life, how she had saved the village and how she had shown them the way to live in balance with the land. They knew that they, too, were a part of something much larger than themselves, a timeless cycle that began with the oak and would continue long after they were gone. One spring, many years after Elara's passing, a young boy approached the oak, carrying a small acorn in his hands. He had heard the stories of Elara and the great oak, and he too wanted to plant a tree. As he knelt to bury the acorn in the fertile soil at the base of the mighty oak, he felt the same quiet sense of reverence that had touched every person who had tended to the land before him. And so, the cycle continued. The new oak would one day pass, but the seeds it had sown would grow, just as Elara had grown from a young girl beneath its shade to the wise guardian of the village. The village, the earth, and the oak were forever intertwined, their stories woven together into the fabric of time. As the years turned into decades, the village continued to flourish under the watchful branches of the oak. Though the seasons changed and the world outside their small community evolved, the connection between the land and the people remained as strong as ever. The children who once ran beneath the oak's shade grew into adults, passing on the lessons of respect, balance, and sacrifice that had been taught to them by Elara. The oak, its towering presence now a fixture of the village's history, stood as a constant reminder of the price that had been paid for their peace and prosperity. One winter evening, when the sky was particularly clear and the stars shone brightly above the village, a group of villagers gathered around the oak. They had come to honor not just the tree, but the memory of Elara, whose spirit they felt in every breeze that rustled the leaves, in every flower that bloomed in the spring, and in every harvest that graced their tables. They knew that the oak had been a gift, but it was Elara's wisdom that had guided them, and it was her love for the land that had made the village what it was. As the elders sat beneath the oak, sharing stories of their youth, the new generation listened intently, absorbing the tales of their ancestors. They knew that their time would come, just as Elara's had, and that they too would one day be called to care for the oak and the land. The circle of life was eternal, and each person, like the oak, had their place in it. One night, as the first snow began to fall softly on the village, a young girl approached the oak. She was holding an acorn, just as Elara had done so many years ago. With trembling hands, she knelt beside the tree and carefully planted it in the rich, fertile soil. As she stood back, she felt a warmth deep in her chest, a quiet assurance that the cycle would continue. The oak's legacy would endure, not just through the generations of the village, but through the land itself. The village, now fully ingrained in the rhythms of nature, had come to understand the deep meaning of their existence alongside the land. The oak, still mighty and proud, continued to stand at the center of their world. With each passing year, its branches grew heavier with leaves, and its roots dug deeper into the earth, holding the land together with a quiet, powerful strength. The villagers, young and old, looked to it for guidance, a constant reminder of the lessons that had been passed down through generations. Elara's story, and that of the oak, had become a part of the village's very essence. The acorn that had been planted so many years ago by the riverbank had grown into a tree that could never be replaced, but the values it symbolized, sacrifice, respect, and the importance of giving back to the earth, were forever embedded in the hearts of the people. On the anniversary of the oak's original planting, a celebration took place beneath its towering branches. It was a celebration not just of the tree, but of the cycle of life that had sustained them for so long. The villagers sang songs of thanks, made offerings of flowers and fruit, and shared stories of how their lives had been touched by the oak and by Elara's spirit. It was a time for remembrance, but also for renewal. Every year, A new acorn would be planted at the base of the great tree, ensuring that the cycle would continue, just as Elara had taught them. As the sun began to set on the day of the celebration, the golden light spilling over the village, the young girl who had planted the acorn stood back and looked at the towering oak. Her heart swelled with pride, knowing that she too was a part of something larger than herself, a part of the ongoing cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The oak had given its life for the land, and now it was her turn to ensure that the lessons it imparted would live on forever. With the rustle of the leaves above, the wind seemed to whisper through the oak's branches, carrying with it the echoes of Elara's wisdom. "Remember," it seemed to say, "you are never alone. You are always part of the earth, and the earth is part of you." Elara's legacy, like the oak's roots, was eternal, and the village would continue to grow, strong and unified, for as long as the oak stood. Sweet dreams.